It's been complicated with COVID because it's dominated everything. No room to talk about things like HIV.
When I learned I was HIV positive, I went through a phase where I completely gave up and expected to die.
Nowadays, you can live a good life with HIV. You take one pill every day and it's undetectable.
And welcome to a new edition. I'm Nadia Sharbi, and this week we're putting the focus on HIV AIDS as we mark 40 years since the virus was first detected in 1981. It's a little known fact that French scientists and doctors played a major role in isolating and understanding the virus at the time. Today, an estimated 173,000 people live with HIV in France. Let's start with an overview of the country's role in the fight against this ongoing pandemic.
The year is 1981. A patient with an unusual ailment ends up in the office of French doctor Willy Rosenbaum. The doctor recognizes the symptoms, having just read about them in the New York Times. This prompts him to launch a research group in France. The team includes doctors and specialists who were interested in studying a disease that only seemed to affect gay men and intravenous drug users. Epidemiologist David Klatzmann was part of that team.
This small group got together every 2 weeks to consult just 4 patients, which goes to show how interested we really were. 2 of our original members also belonged to an association of gay doctors. It was essential for us to have contacts in this community because they had answers to the questions that we were unable to answer ourselves.
The team concluded that the disease was a viral infection. They came up with several hypotheses. To develop their theories, they examined the white blood cells of infected patients who had yet to develop severe symptoms. They examined the patient's lymph nodes and sent samples to the Pasteur Institute, which detected the virus in its very first microbial culture. At about the same time in the U.S., a professor by the name of Robert Gallo also identified the retrovirus that would come to be known as AIDS. The U.S. government then credited Gallo with discovering the virus first. It would take years of bitter disputes, scientific articles, and lawsuits for France to finally be recognized as the pioneering AIDS researcher that it was. A recognition that came to fruition in 2008 when professors Luc Montagnier and Françoise Barré-Sinoussi won the Nobel Peace Prize in Medicine. But further research was stalled by a broader lack of funding in France.
Simply put, for every euro invested in research in France, 10 are invested in the US. That changes absolutely everything.
Antiretroviral drugs such as AZT were introduced in the U.S. in 1987, followed by treatments consisting of a combination of drugs or cocktails in the 1990s that meant HIV was no longer a death sentence. But a vaccine has remained elusive. Recent advances, such as the mRNA technology used in some COVID-19 vaccines, have sparked new hope. In February, France's Vaccine Research Institute launched clinical trials for a vaccine that might prevent AIDS.
When they were studied in animals, the vaccines we developed were among the most promising in the world.
France is still far behind the U.S. when it comes to funding, but French scientists are hoping that could change with the possibility of an AIDS vaccine on the horizon.
Well, to tell us more about the situation in France 4 decades on and the impact of the ongoing COVID pandemic, I've come to meet Aurélien Beaucamp, the president of leading French NGO AIDES, in its Parisian community health centre, Le Spot. Hello, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, I mentioned at the start of the show that an estimated 173,000 people are estimated to be HIV positive here in France. Does that include those people who don't know that they've contracted this virus?
There
are 24,000 people included among those you are referring to, according to our estimates, people who are living with HIV and don't know about it. These are people who have a lot of trouble talking about their sex life with doctors and health health professionals, simply because these health professionals don't know their situation, their lifestyle and their daily routine. So it's these people we need to go out and find. We as an NGO need to offer them a test and then accordingly get them the treatment so that they no longer transmit HIV.
And can you tell us more about these different populations?
So these are people who don't get regular checkups, like sex workers, drug users, men who have sex with other men, who are either gay or bisexual, who don't necessarily use those terms to define themselves, but they do have relations with other men. It can also be immigrants and transgender, people who are discriminated against over their lifestyle vis-à-vis their sex life.
Par rapport à leur mode de vie et par rapport à leur pratique sexuelle.
And are those populations and society at large sufficiently informed today about the dangers of this virus?
I have to say yes and no. We have campaigns which exist. There are also big national ones every year. But they have been churning out the same information for the past 10, 15, 20 years. We don't talk about new tools like PrEP, which is a revolutionary prevention drug, or of positive messages that we have known for the past 10 years, that someone who has HIV and is receiving treatment cannot pass on the virus.
Ne peut pas transmettre le virus à un tiers aujourd'hui.
And what kind of impact has the COVID crisis had on this community and trying to get through to this community?
It's been really complicated with COVID because COVID has dominated everything. And we had very little room to talk about other things, notably the HIV epidemic. And we saw an important drop in the number of HIV tests being done in France. Plus, we also had a significant decline in the number of prescriptions for PrEP. For now, we shouldn't raise alarm bells because we don't have enough data to know if it will have consequences in terms of a rebound in HIV infections. We can also assume that there were fewer sexual encounters, fewer interactions. For now, it's too early to say.
And are you hopeful that the scientific momentum around fighting this COVID epidemic and pandemic might actually trickle down in some way to research on finding a vaccine for HIV/AIDS?
I would say yes and no. Yes, because it's always hopeful to have new technology which allows us to work on research for a possible vaccine. But we have to understand, we are talking about two viruses that are extremely different. HIV is a complex virus which hides in cells and is very difficult to fight. So I don't think we are on the cusp of a vaccine.
Je pense qu'on n'est pas encore à la veille d'une découverte d'un vaccin à terme.
Is there much discrimination in France for people who are HIV positive?
That's a good question, because while the view of HIV has evolved in France, we know how it's transmitted and know more about the virus. But in terms of how we view people who are living with HIV, I want to say we are still in the 80s and 90s, where we have this instinct to judge the person living with the virus and make them feel guilty, like as though if someone has HIV today, it's their fault, because they didn't protect themselves properly. It's victim blaming there. It's simply HIV phobia, the fear of those living with HIV.
Ça s'appelle de la sérophobie, tout simplement, de la peur de la personne qui vit avec le VIH.
Aurélien Beaucamp, thank you very much.
Merci à vous.
Well, 4 decades of scientific progress mean that living with HIV/AIDS is more manageable from a medical perspective. But ongoing stigma and widespread ignorance regarding the effectiveness of antiretroviral treatment continues to put a strain on HIV-positive citizens.
Christine, 52 years old, infected with HIV in 1990.
My name is Paul. I've been HIV positive since 2009, since I was 22.
Two HIV-positive people with very different experiences, although they do have one thing in common.
This is my medication. It's a little pill I take each morning with a glass of water.
For HIV, I have one pill, but for the illnesses I have linked to HIV, like the transplant, high blood pressure, I have dozens of pills a day.
Christine was infected during her very first sexual experience. The young footballer's life ground to a halt.
When I learned I was HIV positive, I went through a phase where I completely gave up and expected to die. I didn't eat, I stopped playing football, seeing family, having children wasn't a possibility. I was going to die, and that's really what I expected.
But like any good sportsperson, Christine bounced back.
I agreed to take part in a trial for the first medication to come on the market, AZT, which meant I might get treatment. Unfortunately, I experienced side effects, including neuropathy, and I had to stop treatment. And then, in 1997, the first tri-therapies arrived, and that was such a relief.
But the good news didn't last long. She developed several related illnesses.
I got cat scratch disease and other things. They couldn't work out what it was.
In 2006, she underwent a liver transplant, and the medication she took changed her physically.
The therapies weren't tested on women. I went through changes to my body, which became more masculine.
Paul's experience with HIV has been completely different. He's had the benefit of years of research.
HIV today is just a virus inside your body. When it's under control, the illness doesn't start. So I can spill all my blood in the street, we can roll around in it, and you're not going to get HIV. I don't have HIV in my blood or in my semen, it's completely under control.
Thanks to his treatment, Paul's viral load is low. He's clinically undetectable, which means he can't pass the virus on. While treatments have changed, there's still stigma around the virus.
On gay dating apps like Grindr, people ask, are you clean? But having HIV doesn't make you dirty.
HIV is now part of their identities. They've created lives around the virus and are members of organizations that battle the disease. Christine hasn't given up football. Every Wednesday, she laces up to train a children's team.
The plan is to stay in the same field, to continue to experience the positive energy we find in sport, as that gives me a boost too, because when we are well in our minds, we are well in our bodies. That's my mantra.
And with that, we leave this edition. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to France 24.
And I'm the France 24 correspondent in New Delhi. I cover news from India and other countries in South Asia. Catch me on our news bulletins from the region.
Mandakini Gallert, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.